Been media reports about religious instruction in schools, particularly one program, Connect program, which is being reviewed by the Education Department. And tonight my guests are from the Christian Religious Instruction Network, Karen and Paul. And maybe you've got a question or a comment or you want to join the conversation. 1300 965 965 is the talkback number. Text message is 0419 187 874. Joining us is Jen. Hello, Jen.
Hello.
How are you?
Not too bad, not too bad. I'm just ringing as someone who, I think I've taught RE in schools in Queensland and also New South Wales, and something about the curriculum that has always struck me, and I think this feeds into the idea, previous points about, a well-rounded education and RI being, irrelevant or relevant, is that it's history, and it's history about a person called Jesus who was, pretty much without argument the most influential man that ever lived. And so children are being taught stories about this man that are really going to help them understand, the history of, civilization and our world and literature. And just if they don't know about him, then there's going to be a huge gap in their education.
Well, I think you're right. I mean, our whole dating system's centred around him. So, and our kids, if they're not going to learn about him, where are they going to learn it?
Yeah. Yep.
Yep. So many professors have said you can't really study Western literature or Western culture intelligently or coherently without starting with the Bible. There's so much of our language, so much of our literature, so much of our heritage, so much of our politics, so much of our art is grounded in this Judeo-Christian heritage. And you're exactly right. I've talked to English teachers who say the kids who come into their classes in Year 11 and 12 and have no biblical knowledge at all, they are at a disadvantage. And I'm not having a go at people who don't want to teach their children that. That's just English teachers saying, you talk about the writing on the wall and people don't know what that means. There's so many things like that, and Shakespeare uses it, and so it is exactly as you said. It's actually part of our culture. I like to use the idea that our culture floats on the water of the Judeo-Christian story, and so RI is actually giving those children that water to float on, and we need that water for our society. And if we pull the plug on it, what's going to happen? It's not a very good picture, and that unfortunately, and I think it's unknowingly what the opponents of it want to do. They want to pull the plug on this, drain the water, and they sort of have this mysterious idea that we're going to float on sort of secularism. And historian Will Durant, who wrote an 11-volume sort of history of civilization, says there is no significant example in history before our time of a society maintaining moral life without religion. That as soon as you pull religion out, as soon as you pull the plug, and he was saying any religion, society sinks, or a different religion will flood in to take its place. And so RI is not about sort of coming in and bashing these kids and trying to sort of convert them. It's actually about giving them that water to float on so that they will do well, and giving our society that water to float on.
Yep. And it's they're just fascinated with the stories. They just lap it up because it's, they're learning these amazing things. I remember doing the story of Jesus turning water into wine. And I mean, if that's not a story that's, well known in kind of culture and literature, I don't know what is. And, they just can't believe it, and they love it.
That's excellent.
Jen, what motivated you to get involved in teaching RI?
Look, I mean, as a Christian, I believe that, every child ought to have the opportunity to hear the words of the Bible and to meet the person of Jesus. He is, he is everything, and everyone ought to have the opportunity to at least know about him. And I would never coerce the children. It was just simply, presenting them with the facts. This is who he is. This is what he did. This is what he said. And they just loved it. But, there was no pressure at all. Yeah.
Karen?
It's a good point you made about the Bible being history. I'm aware that the the Gospels, the books of Matthew, Mark, Luke and John, are actually used in universities around the world in their ancient history departments as texts that people study. So it's great to have exposure to those texts in primary school. And another point, I think, is that we know what happens to cultures when they remove religion from them. We look at the Soviet Union, we look at China, and we look at Nazi Germany, and those countries were experiments in removing God, and we just know what's happened there, and it's very sad stories.
Oh, and that's a good point, Karen, because since the fall of the Soviet Union, we've seen a resurgence of Russian Orthodox, you know, and in spite of all what Stalin wanted to do, is that people's faith was still intrinsic to who they are.
I love C.S. Lewis's quote, we're not physical beings having a spiritual experience, we're spiritual beings having a physical experience. And so as soon as we sort of take away that faith aspect, there is this sort of gap. So there is that, and that's part of why the easy solutions that are given by the group, why don't you just do it on a Sunday, or why don't you just put it into this or that, take it away. We don't realise the social and educational impacts that's going to have.
And kids are asking hard questions. An earlier caller asked about when it was age appropriate, and we don't teach the very little. We start at grade 1, that's the youngest, and that's the age that I actually specialise in teaching. And grade 1 children have got hard questions. They're already thinking the big questions about who made the world and how do I solve problems with my fighting sister or something like that. And the Bible has those answers. And that's what we go into the classroom to teach what the Bible says. And they choose to believe it, or they can choose not to.
Jen, what was your experience in the responses from teachers towards you coming in and teaching RI, and also parents who may not have been church parents or Christian parents?
Yeah, look, by and large, the teachers were, the worst I got was, say, just a little bit indifferent, but, by and large, they were really grateful. Some of them were really interested. Some of them were really grateful that someone came in for half an hour while they could do some extra work. But they could see, by and large, they saw the value of what was happening. In terms of hearing from parents who, weren't necessarily from a Christian background themselves, the funniest story was the mother who I taught, I think it was year 1s, and we'd had I was teaching, I did sort of a, history of the whole Bible overview thing, and it ended up in a bit of a party, and the mum came up to me and said, I asked my son, what he learned at school this week, and he can't remember anything, but he tells me what he learned in RI.
Sometimes I go shopping between 3 and 4 of an afternoon, and I meet the families of the kids that I've been teaching, and invariably I'm introduced to the parents, and it's quite common for the mother or father to say to me, RI is my child's favourite subject.
Yeah.
They remember the stories.
No assessment.
Yeah. There's no exams in RI and no homework.
There's probably a lot of joy in what goes on, which is good. They did it's old now, back in 86 or something, the government did a total review of the education department. It was one of the ex-premiers. You can find this report. And the subject that got overwhelming positive support from teachers, principals, students was the top-rated subject was RI, which was amazing. It wasn't maths, it wasn't music, it was RI. It was not just children, it was the teachers, principals. They all loved it. I mean, that's 25 years ago.
But Paul, that speaks to the quote, the C.S. Lewis quote, that we're spiritual beings having a physical experience.
Yes, that there is something there that is intangible. And I know Karen's had principals say to them, you guys come in and do something no one else does. And I don't want to lose that, and that's principals who aren't faith people, but they can see the intangibles, which was what Cameron was talking about. There's something going on here that we can't put our finger on, but it makes a difference.
I know a common complaint that principals are receiving at the moment is that the RI teachers are too much fun. That's coming from the parents. That's coming from the parents whose kids aren't in RI, and their kids are somewhere else, not listening to the lessons. But they hear from the kids in RI that they like being there, and so they go home and tell their mum or dad they want to be in RI because they hear that there's good stories, and the teachers do music and games, and they just want to be part of that and to hear about it, and those parents are marching up to the principal. Only a few of them, but complaining that we're too good. What we're doing, which is unusual complaint.
If I come back to my opening start to the program tonight, there are aspects who want to paint Christianity as evil, nasty, terrible, and that's not the case.
No.
That's not the case. And yes, has Christianity throughout history made mistakes? Yes, it certainly has.
Amen.
Right? But if we come back to the gospel, and the heart of the gospel is actually about how to live in good, healthy relationships with our Maker and with one another. And, I think that some people just don't know it.
It's a funny thing that many people have tried to rewrite the Ten Commandments because they kind of go, the Ten Commandments are bad, and they'll rewrite the Ten Commandments. And usually, 9 times out of 10, the very first command that they'll write is do unto others as you want to do done to you, thinking that didn't come from Jesus. There's this irony. I'm going to write a better 10 Commandments, and here it is. That's my first opening game. And you think, that's what Jesus said. So there's this bizarre thing going on.
Yeah.
Hey, Jen, thanks for ringing in and being part of the conversation.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Tonight we're talking about the importance of religious instruction in our state schools as a result of some of the stuff that's been going on in the media and the review of the Connect program, which has been one school complaint. And so maybe you got some thoughts or comments or questions. You can join the conversation. Give me a call, 1300 965 965. Text message is 0419187874, and the phones have gone a little quiet after being a little bit crazy for a while, but that's good. You get a chance to ring in now if you want to, 1300 965 965. One of the statements that I've heard floated around is that most states in Australia are giving up on RI. What's the truth?
Well, it's not true. There's only one state that has, and that's Victoria, and we're hopeful that's only a temporary thing. But in New South Wales, they've had a major review, and while the results of that still haven't been finalised, the Connect program has undergone a thorough review in New South Wales, and it's passed all the benchmark tests for the New South Wales Education Department, and that's why we're so hopeful and believe that that the review that will come out from Education Queensland here will be positive.
Yep. Different states have different rules because it is a state-based thing, and so that's why I think in South Australia it's not as common. But Victoria is the only state that's done it, and it was more, like we said, for a political reason rather than for educational reasons. But yes, RI, it's actually growing in New South Wales because they had ethics come in, I can't remember, 6 years ago or something, and at first there was a bit of a storm about adding ethics to the curriculum. People thought that people would opt out of RI and go into ethics. But it's actually been a great thing because RI does, it's been going for a while. It does get forgotten. I know a lot of pastors, etc., they sort of forget, you got some RI teachers, they don't do much with them, and it gets forgotten. And so in New South Wales, that really sort of gave them a bit of impetus to say, well, if we've got competition, we've got to do this well. And so that's really brought it back to life, got more volunteers. They've got paid teachers now in some schools where the community gather behind and put it. So we think this is a good wake-up call because this CRI network, as we said, it's only been going for a couple of years for the same sort of reason that a lot of places, they don't put a lot of effort into RI. There's no government funding for it. A lot of it comes out of the pocket of the religious instructors. They fork out any money. And so putting it back on the agenda, getting people talking on the radio, we think will inspire people who are out there thinking, well, I could do this. Maybe I can support the religious instructor in my school, in my church. Maybe I can talk to the religious instructor in my school and encourage them. So we're really thinking this is going to be a bit like shedding that next layer of skin, like I know the reptiles do. Now and then you've got to shed a bit of skin because there's always some weird stuff going on in some pocket somewhere, and we don't like that. We don't want RI to be bad because bad RI actually chases kids away. Yeah. We want RI to be done very well to the government's guidelines so that we continue to work in harmony with the Education Department, in harmony with schools, and that everyone can go on with a big smile on their face as they have been, saying, this is actually really wonderful. It gets volunteers into our schools, and it gets this spiritual dimension into a school that otherwise would probably not have much.
my experience, now going back to when I was in school back in the dark ages, as some people would say.
Before that referendum.
Yeah, somewhere around that time. Primary school, there were a lot of parents who came in and taught RI, and I know that my wife taught RI in our kids' school out at Mount Cotton State School for a number of years, and they had the good curriculum and they had training and all that stuff. But back when I was in, and I'm thinking particularly high school, is that most of my thought of RI teachers were retirees who were giving of their time, or paid religious to come in. And sometimes back in my day, it felt like there was a bit of a disconnect between what they were trying to communicate and connecting with us at a high school level. Tell us about the sorts of people that teach RI these days, because I imagine there's people who have got that picture.
And it not a lot of RI happens in high schools, which could be
At the
something
moment,
that changes. Yeah. In some ways, Karen is probably your perfect example of a religious instructor. I don't know whether she wants to give her profile away. 27, isn't it?
That's right. Female. Yeah. So there's no particular mould, but the average RI instructor would probably be a mother and who's had children at a local school and has been well connected there, goes to a church in the local area, starts teaching RI when the kids are at that school, and then continues doing so. But we have males. There's a man from my church with a full-time job, has a long lunch break once a week and his employers allowed him to come into the school to have time off and go to the local school where his kids are and take a couple of classes. So there are requirements, though. Not just anyone can be an RI instructor. There's things that you have to meet and training that you have to do. And it's also important to remember that RI instructors are supervised in our classrooms. We're not allowed in and the teacher runs away. The teacher is standing in. The teachers are listening and supervising us, and they're there for behaviour management. And there haven't been complaints from the teachers at Windsor State School.
And we also get a lot of ex-teachers, so school teachers who they retire and they think, I still want to maintain this passion I have for being with kids and getting the best out of them. So a lot of teachers retire and then spend the next 5-10 years becoming religious instructors, and a lot of those mums have professional backgrounds. They've had a bit of a career, they've got their kids, they've got some spare time, so they go into the classrooms. But like we said, you have to have blue cards, you have to do Ed Queensland
code of conduct training and child protection training.
And then your denomination has to be okay with you. And we're trying to bring in some really robust... There has already been lots of training out there. I suppose there hasn't been one course that everyone has to do, and that's probably part of what we're thinking about is how can we ensure, to become part of a modern world where you expect...
Quality assurance.
Yeah, quality assurance, that we say, well, we really need that we know someone up in North Queensland, someone down here, they've all got the same sort of training and we know what they're doing, and they've been told the sort of things that good religious instructors are told, such as it's not about putting pressure on the kids and what's appropriate and what's not appropriate.
Which we'll come back and talk about in a moment. And I'm glad you raised the point about teachers being in the room, because that's a requirement under law that a registered teacher has to be in the classroom.
That's right, it is.
And so whoever comes in, it wouldn't matter if it was the school nurse or whoever, if they're not a registered teacher with the Queensland College of Teachers, is that the teacher has to remain in the room. That's just the way the protocol is. 1300 965 965. My conversation's about the importance of religious instruction in our state schools. Text message 0419 187 874. Joining us is Ashley. Hello, Ashley.
Hi there.
How are you?
Yeah, I'm excellent, thank you.
What would you like to share with us?
Well, actually, I've just drove home from church actually this evening, and I'm actually a 20-year-old RE teacher at what was my high school. And I teach grades 7s and 8s, and I actually find it a super duper important program because I know personally myself it definitely impacted me going through high school and having people there willing to share good news with me, and even people that are now my close friends at church came to faith through the same RE program.
Wow. So
yeah.
So now you're teaching in that, and so I guess that's a natural flow on for you, is that you benefit out of this and now you want to give back.
Yeah, that's definitely it. Yeah, I find it such a beneficial experience, and I've had awesome feedback from teachers as well. They come in, they do have to be there in the classroom with you, and they encourage the kids to really listen because it is a pivotal point in life for them, and they should really have the option to choose whether or not they want to follow or not.
So, Ashley, were you forced to follow? Were you coerced? What happened to you?
No, not at all. Well, because obviously now I work underneath the Education Queensland standards, I myself can only say statements that are grounded in myself. Like I can say, oh, I believe this, Christians believe this. And it's a really, really beneficial time for kids because I know myself and my fellow RE teachers, we tell the kids to think what they think and really actually challenge us and tell us what they think about the topics that we're raising, whether or not they've heard differently. And so, yeah, no, not at all. Yeah,
and you've got the Year 7 and 8s, and that's exactly the age where they ask you the questions. Because I used to teach high school, and that's when you walk in and sometimes you feel like the Christian being thrown to the lions, because they'll come out with the hardest questions and, sorry to, Karen, Year 1's pretty, Year 1 has its own, its own dimensions in that they just love you and they got no attention span. Year 7 and 8, that's where they're going, well, what about this and what about that and you're like, oh man, I've got to think this through. So they're more likely to persuade you to give it up than you are to persuade them.
Yeah, it's really, we had actually one of our RE lessons was purely dedicated towards children's questions, and we were able to get the questions the week before, and then I was able to process them, talk through them with our leader, and really give good, solid, grounded answers for the kids. And the teachers gave me feedback from that they were really encouraged by that, and also just the fact that it is not pushing kids to think the way that you think. It's just more about raising awareness that this is actually what a whole group of people believe, and I'm one of them, and so I'd love you to have the opportunity to also consider this for yourself.
You sound like a great religious instructor, Ashley. That's fantastic.
Thank you. That's my heart behind it.
Now, Ashley, tell us, at your school, is there one coordinator who coordinates the whole program for Year 7 and 8?
Yes. So it's actually my pastor. He coordinates it, and he actually coordinated it back when I was in school. So that's back when I was in grade 8. So it was a while ago now. And there's a group of 6 of us who go in and just whenever it fits in with the school's developmental program, we get slotted into different classrooms. I teach 2 set 7 classes and 2 set 8 classes, and we also work really closely with the chaplain in the school.
Okay. And it's so great to hear your story, that how it's impacted your life and you want to give back, particularly when we're hearing some stuff in the media, but we're not hearing the counter argument of going, hang on a minute, this changed my life.
Yeah.
And
definitely. Yeah,
and Jess, who was one of our earlier callers, said it was life-saving for her. So hey, thanks, Ashley.
Thank you, Ashley.
No,
yes, it's
thank you
great to
very
have
much.
a younger person too.
Thanks for your call. Talking Life, I'm Peter Janetzki, and we're talking about the importance of religious instruction in our state schools, and that was fantastic to hear from Ashley, working in a high school, about the personal story. I always say that personal story is one of the testimonies that can never be refuted. And so to actually have Ashley's story is that, in spite of all the criticisms that people might want to throw, is that they can't refute her own experience and her own story. And
we do know people have bad experiences in RI, but it's a bit like I had bad experiences in science or English. I had an English teacher who, she believed in reincarnation and wanted to tell us all about that, and you sort of think, this is state school, etc., etc. But you get over that, So there are bad stories out there. Of course there are.
Yep.
And that's part of what we're trying to do, is say, well, we want people like Ashley who know about grounding and owning statements. So it's not about pushing stuff on, but saying, well, here's what Christians believe, here's what I believe, what do you believe? You work it out. Talk to your parents. Parents, we sort of undermine what parent influence there are. With the sort of part of the rhetoric of the sort of the RI Scare campaign is that, these people are coming in and brainwashing our children. We know the most influential person in a child's life is their parents. And so I could come in and say, the sky is blue, but if they go home and dad says, that's a load of rubbish, the sky is green, the kids are going to believe the sky is green. So it's kind of a bit of a fantasy to think that we can come in and somehow brainwash a whole generation of kids. The kids that, if parents gel with what we gel, it's actually a very positive thing. So if we're saying, oh, well, this is what we believe, and the parents say, hey, this is what my RI teacher said, what do you reckon? And they go, oh, yeah, that's good. That's actually good grounding for kids. It's only parents who are actually destructive that they will then listen to their RI teacher. So if you've got a parent who's not a very good parent, you want some positive people like RI teachers in the school to say, here's a different way to think, here's a different way to live, so that they have an option to say, well, gee, look at my parents, this is a destructive environment I'm in. We need positive people. But, most of the time, whatever the parents say goes, and that's not until teenage years when the kids start to think about, well, what do my parents know, that sort of thing. So this rhetoric about we're sort of brainwashing a generation.
And particularly at that year 7, year 8, as they're starting to develop their own identity, trying to discover who they are, separate to their parents, separate to what are my values, what are my beliefs. So they're questioning.
Yep, and that's actually the fantastic stage. That Westerhoff guy talked about, you need to experience it and belong in the primary school. The next stage is actually wrestling with it. And that sometimes we get nervous about that, like, oh, these kids are asking questions. In church we do that, where they're going, oh, they're asking questions. You shouldn't ask, just believe. And that's actually the worst thing we can do. We actually have to engage with those questions, give them serious answers. And kids then, that's when they're working out, who am I? What am I going to believe? And they need to go through that questioning stage, which is what Westerhoff found. People need to go through that. Don't be afraid of it. It's actually part of a healthy faith development.
This is Talking Life. I'm Peter Janetzki. It's 9:30. We've got half an hour to go. We're talking about the importance of religious instruction in our state schools. And so maybe you've got a thought or a comment or a question and you've been listening. Now's time to unglue yourself and pick up the phone if you're one of those who are waiting to the end of the program, because you'll miss out if you leave it too much longer. 1300 965 965 is the talkback number. Text messages 0419 187 874. A word from our sponsors. I'm going to be back with more talk in a moment, so stick around.
Talking Life with Peter Janetzki. Real people, real issues, real life. Phone 1300 965 965. On 96.5.
96.5's Backseat Drivers with Luke and Susie. Brisbane's only husband and wife team are the best type of backseat drivers for your run home.
You took a test, you were worst at empathy.
Just because in the think versus feel, I got a 0 for feel. Just because in a list of the top 34 things I'm good at, it was in the bottom 3.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean that I don't have high on the empathy. Actually, that's exactly what it means.
Very low.
Very.
On the empathy scale.
Very low.
96.5's Backseat Drivers. Weekdays from 3 to 6. We're family's number one. 96.5.
G'day, Dr. Mike here. At Vet Products Direct, we're a team of vets and vet nurses committed to bringing you the very best for your pet at the very best prices. Like $7.95 off Revolution 6-packs, 10% off Panorama Strontal and Profender, and $10 to $20 off special packs of Hills, Eukanuba and Royal Canin Premium Pet Foods. Quote promo code 965 for these great offers, plus fast, free delivery on every order. Only the best for you and your pet at station sponsor vetproductsdirect.com. We're keeping pet care affordable.
I was in prison for 2 years. I lost custody of my kids and my family rejected me. Prison chaplains were there for me. They introduced me to Jesus, and sitting in my prison cell, I've never felt so free. I've been out for 5 years now. I'm a part of a church community and I have custody of my kids again.
Become a prison chaplain. Visit insideoutchaplaincy.org.au to find out how. Inside Out Prison Chaplaincy. We bring hope.
Talking Life with Peter Janetzki on 96.5.
Slogan says, real people, real issues, real life. And so we're wrestling with the importance of religious instruction in our state school, where there has been some criticism made and consequently resulted in a review of one program. That complaint came from one school, Windsor State School, and that's what we've been talking about. So as you listen, you may have some thoughts, comments or questions. Not too late to ring in. Talkback number is 1300 965 965. Text message is 0419 187 874. Let's talk about the circumstances that led to the department's review, because I mentioned in my opener that it was one complaint from one school, or a complaint from a school. talk us through the history of that, and so people get a feel of what that's about, where that's at, and then we can talk about the review and the way forward.
Okay, we believe that the events at Windsor State School actually started a couple of years ago. One parent, who's a lawyer, didn't opt her children into RI at that school, and she was pretty unhappy about the fact that even it was available at the school. And at the time, this is about 2 years ago now, the school was happily using the program called Access Ministries, and due to just one complaint, that RI got shut down at Windsor for a whole term. And during that term, the principal at the time reviewed the curriculum, and he requested a curriculum change, even though that wasn't in accordance with Education Queensland's policy. And the RI coordinator was asked to change to Connect, even though that wasn't what she wanted to do. And she did that because she thought it was important to have a good relationship. And so even though they didn't want it, they moved to Connect. And then a couple of months ago, there was a conversation between, a letter was received rather from the coordinator, just completely out of the blue. No complaint, just the program was shut down. And the acting principal, Matt Keong, wrote to the parents, and we've got a copy of the letter here, and in that he criticised aspects of the curriculum. We actually believe that one of the parents was involved in reviewing the curriculum, but many of the complaints are actually based upon an out-of-date, out-of-print curriculum that has never been used at Windsor State School. Not all of it, but just some of it. Other points, though, relate to what we would call just central beliefs of the Christian faith, as we've talked about before, the message of hope and love of Jesus, and a message of sin, or just people being imperfect. And that's fine if someone wants to not opt their kids in, that they can object, but over 80% of the parents at Windsor State School were opting their kids into Christian RI prior to the current suspension of the program.
Paul, you used the phrase RI scare campaign.
Yes, Medi-scare, RI scare, yeah.
Yeah, and I think I hear, it's almost like for this parent is that they've already exercised their democratic right to opt their child out and say no, they're not participating in that.
Or just not opt their child in.
Yeah, yep. Just my child's not going to be doing this, which is their parental right. But it seems they're not happy with that. It seems like they've actually have a philosophical issue and don't want it in a state school, full stop.
And I think that's really sad. Australia is a pluralist democracy, and none of us are going to agree about everything, let alone religion. That's one subject we're all never going to believe in on the same thing about. But I think that for one parent to disagree and to not opt their children in is actually the system at work. Those who want to opt in can, and someone who doesn't want to opt in doesn't. That's great. That's the system at work, and it's the education system allowing for diversity, which is something that's really important to education.
Which
Queensland.
has been the long-standing principle for RI in Queensland state schools.
That's right, and tolerance of one another. We've got to learn to be tolerant in this country. I think that's very important when we see what's happening overseas, when different people are reacting in dreadful ways, not being tolerant of one another. I've got friends who aren't Christian. It doesn't matter. I've got great relationships with them, and we need to be able to get on with one another, whether we believe in the same God or not. And I think it's really sad that one parent is imposing their beliefs on everyone else.
It's a bit like me coming in and saying, well, I want everyone to learn Christianity, so therefore you have to be in the Christian class, even if you want to opt out or something. If you just flip what this school is doing, sort of thing.
One of my favourite quotes, and I can't remember the source, I've been looking for it, but it says that tolerance taken too far is a vice. And I think that this relates with this text message, and then we'll come back to the review and where's it going. One of the arguments that Queensland Parents for Secular State School has put forward is that parents haven't been given enough information about RI before they sign up. What's Paul's and Karen's take on this?
The curriculum documents are available at any school. All that the parents need to do is go to their principal and ask. At the schools that I'm involved in, I know this is the case for the majority of schools around the place, phone numbers of RI coordinators are available at the beginning of each year in school newsletters. We have open door policies in our classrooms. People can phone up, and the curriculum writers themselves have got websites that are freely available. Anyone who's got the internet can access that information. They have lesson plans up there. People can borrow the curriculum.
Students get a book that they take home it's probably every semester, that goes home with them, and so parents can actually read through what kids are learning. It's kind of like, I think, it's kind of a bit of a thing. What do people want to know? There's some, you're going to learn about the faith that the Bible's got. If you have any RI experience as a child, then you know what's going to be in the curriculum. So, it's very open to find out what's going on. So
there's no conspiracy or scheme here. So I would say back to the Queensland Parents for Secular State Schools is that do your homework.
That's right. Our phone numbers are there. Phone us up and talk to us.
Do your homework. Have a conversation. I get really frustrated with people who want to shoot off arrows of criticism based on little information and never actually come face to face and go, hang on, what do you really think or what do you believe? One of the principles I think that Jesus taught is go one-on-one and talk to people. And, in any conflict resolution process, that's the grounding principle.
And that's Education Queensland's philosophy too. Education Queensland wants problems solved in local levels with principals and teachers and parents involved. And so any principal would welcome parents coming in, asking questions and getting the RI coordinator involved. We've got nothing to hide. We want to tell everyone what we're teaching about, quite the opposite actually, where there's no secrets. And once if your child is opted into RI, it's not like they're in prison either. If you don't like the program once they're opted in, you can just opt them out. It's not a one decision that's fixed forever.
Yep. Another text, and not too late to call in if you've got a question. 1300 965 965. Text message 0419 187 874. All my 12 years of schooling, I attended RI classes. It gave me an understanding of faith and morality that even though I didn't fully embrace it until I was an adult, by the time that day came, I already knew how to approach God by faith in Jesus. I'm grateful that what I learnt persuaded me to stay away from drugs and dangerous sexual behaviours. I'm concerned the Safe Schools program could lead to so much undesired consequences for children, and so do I. I'm really thankful for your message around how RI laid a foundation to think about matters of faith, which is the whole purpose.
Yeah, and that's what I said before, that water that we're helping society to float on. If there's an institute in America called the Search Institute, it sounds a bit funny, but the Search Institute, and they've done copious research, not just around religion, but around all sorts of efforts for adolescents to say, well, what are the best assets for children as they grow up, and one of them is spirituality, that it's a key thing for protecting children from destructive behaviours, whether it be alcohol, sex, etc., etc. So having some spiritual grounding, even if you don't believe it, it actually is a protection about going down pathways that you'll later regret, and you'll suddenly go, how did I get so far down somewhere that really hurt me? Having a spirituality gives you that grounded morality. We back a couple of generations ago, Dewey, the guy who gave us the Dewey Decimal System, he changed the education, the way we did education.
John Dewey.
Yeah, he brought in critical questioning, which is a great thing, but what they didn't anticipate, because before that it was all sit down, listen to the teacher, they tell you what the truth is, and you just suck it up sort of thing. John Dewey said, no, we need to critically challenge things and say, is that really true, etc. What they didn't anticipate was that the kids would actually say, well, who are you as a teacher to tell me? They'd started to critique the teachers. So it wasn't just, where did this idea come from, but, well, who are you to tell me this? And my generation, Gen X, we've grown up with that sort of education. And so when we're given values, we very quickly say, well, who says? Who says? What are we going to ground this in? And that's why our generation and the next generation have thrown off a whole lot of restraint, when it comes to king hitting and all these sort of things. Even we know it in corporate world, that we've got all this corruption in the corporate world that didn't happen as much before, and it's because my generation threw off this stuff. Who said? My parents, they'd been told by their parents, believe this, because of the Bible, but my parents they said, just believe it because we said, because a lot of them started not going to church. Now, my parents happened to still go to church, so I got a grounding. I see this when I do funerals. I've done funerals of all the generations, that you saw how 2 generations ago, they knew, they had a grounding for their morality. The next generation, they still had the grounding, but they didn't pass on why to my generation, Gen X, and we said why. We threw it all off, and we've got a world that's gone a bit crazy, and I'm terrified for the next generation.
And I'll give you a case in point, Paul, on what you're saying, is that when I've talked to young people about sexuality, and I actually just use the statistics as my starting point, I go, really, if you wanted to live with the values that are portrayed in Home and Away, you wouldn't want to live in Summer Bay. Okay?
No.
Because the place would be full of unplanned children and incredible number of diseases. Just statistically. Because I think one of the things that's come out of the current generation is that I can do whatever I want and there are no negative consequences. And whereas actually the story of morality is that there is a consequence to every choice. So please think about that. Whereas almost this move towards entitlement and narcissism is that, I can do whatever I want and there's no consequences.
What do they say? We're free to choose what we want, but we're not free from the consequences of our choice.
Well, I've got a picture of a goldfish jumping out of a goldfish bowl, and I said, freedom only occurs for the environment you're created to live in. So for a goldfish to say, I'm going to jump out and be free, is choosing death.
We have 5 days of playgroup at our church, so we have a large number of mothers and fathers who come. And one mother moved up from Sydney, and I just was chatting to her and say, "Why'd you move up to Brisbane? Why'd you come here from Brisbane and Sydney?" So I'm getting my stuff mixed up. But she said she had a horrible story. She'd married a guy. He was a drug addict. They'd lived together for 7 years, and she worked 2 jobs to keep his drug habit in and to get her kids to school. And she said and I thought, what? And she said after 7 years she'd had enough, and she'd moved to Brisbane to get away from this situation. And she said to me, and I thought it was just bizarrely profound, she said, "I just want a boring life." And by boring, because she'd done the sex, drugs, rock and roll, sort of typical sort of stuff, and she realised that, well, at first it's great, but it just smashes you. And she said, I want, the house, going to school, wearing normal clothes, school uniforms. I don't want the drugs and the alcohol and all of this sort of stuff. And it was very it was reassuring for me, because I chose early on, I've never done drugs and alcohol. I'm typical square, boring. But to see someone who's come from that say, I want the boring life, because the boring life is the good life.
Yeah.
The full life.
It is. Yeah. And we call it boring, and it's not. It's actually where full life is found.
Let's come back to the education department situation. So a parent made a complaint, and then the principal did a review. So tell us how that led to Education Queensland wanting to review the material, and where's that at?
Well, the Education Minister called a review based upon the letter that the acting principal at Windsor State School wrote, and we've actually had a legal opinion done on that, which I think, Peter, you might be putting up. Is it on the Facebook page? I
will try to get that posted either on my Facebook page or through the stations.
Yes, okay. Which basically says that what has happened there is not in accordance with Education Queensland's own policy. But the Education Queensland is reviewing the Connect program, and it's a very big program. There's different age levels, and there's a 3-year cycle with 2 semesters each year, and there's a lot of lessons, over 500, I think.
Yeah,
Paul,
there's something like 500. So I think something they thought was, this won't take long. You suddenly go, there's that many books.
That's right. So initially it was just supposed to take 2 weeks. We're up to 6 weeks now, but we're very hopeful of an early resolution. And
the churches, heads of churches, they've talked to the education department, and there is a group that is set up to interact between the churches, and not just the churches but the other faith groups as well. And so they're all in the process of working this out. And in many ways, like we said before, it's about shedding that layer of skin, and we're really hopeful that we just get better RI and better processes. And like we said, it's very easy because it runs in the background, and it's run very successfully for many years, people forget what the guidelines are. Often principals, they're not up to date because it's running well. Why do you need to look up the guidelines when everything's running well? And sometimes this sort of thing says, oh, we'll just remind you, this is the way it's done, and that sort of thing.
So let me put this together for a moment, that if the parent making the complaint, and this is a hypothetical, if the parent's making the complaint is really just anti-Christian, is they're actually putting all religious instruction at jeopardy, or they're actually putting just this particular program?
No, there's no review into religious instruction in state schools. It's only into Connect, and it's only at Windsor State School, and that's it.
But your question's right in some ways. I think, that it would put everything into jeopardy if that happened. But like we said, there has to be a change in the law, and that's a long process.
Yeah.
And the overwhelming majority of Queenslanders want this program. We recognise that that it is a legal right at the moment, but we also recognise that it's a privilege to be in our state schools. And I'm sure that they're not going to throw away a program that over 80% of parents opt their kids into.
And that's not the picture you're getting from mainstream media, which is so left-dominated. As I look through mainstream media, that a lot of the ones who are critical of it, very left position, but never have a balancing argument. I have not heard a lot of those.
And religion, like many other subjects, there are opponents, and those who are opposing are really small in number, but they are very vocal, and we can get the impression that there's a lot of people out there making a big song and dance about this, but that's not true. And so thanks for letting us be on your program to talk about truth. And the truth is that there are only a small group of people who are opposed, and the overwhelming majority of Queenslanders want this program.
And I'd actually say part of it is because RI's in the background, RI instructors are not upfront people. And I had an article in Sydney Morning Herald, Brisbane Times, because after a few articles, because very much we thought this will just blow over. It's a few people having a bit of a rant. This will blow over. And we thought, well, okay, we need to step up and put some comments in. So, in some ways it mightn't be the media's fault. No one else was saying anything. But when we approached them and said, hey, can we have right of reply? They said, yes, go for it. Same with some of the early articles that were written had no comments from, the RI side. But when we made contact with them, those journalists were very happy to put our quotes in and to balance off some of the stories. I think journalists, I'm defending them here, they're under a whole lot of pressure to get stories done. And sometimes it's, this person told me this, they're very loud, I'm going to run with it. But we've found when we've actually expressed our side, they've gone, okay, I didn't realise, and I think that is probably part of our message tonight. Is there are a small group of people who are very loud, and while we thought this will blow over, what it's meant is that it's made it to, I suppose, the education department, and that's been disappointing because you sort of think, really? And we do need people who are positive towards RI, people who love it, whether you go to a church or not. If your kids are enjoying it, send an email to Kate Jones, a very polite email, and just say, we like this, we want it to remain. If you're Buddhist, if you're Baha'i, if you're whatever faith tradition you are, say, yes, we like how it's run, we like what it's doing. So you can talk to your local member, you can just send nice, polite emails saying, don't take this away from us. Because at the end of the day, we're pro-choice of parents being able to choose what their children experience, so that there's not one group saying you have to have this, or, and saying you have to have nothing is saying you have to have atheism or whatever it is. Yep. And that's what some people don't realise. By taking it away, it is saying, here is your religion, and it's no religion. And like I said, it's making a religion irrelevant, and it's giving a whole generation of children that message that religion is irrelevant, and that's just not true for our history. It's not factual.
One more question that came in via text. Some of the most moral people I know are not religious. Do Paul and Karen think that kids can only get morals from RI?
Not at all. Not at all. And a great person I know, they said people are at their best at religion and at their worst. Because one of the things with religion is if you have God as your motivation, it turns up your morality, but it can also turn up which is what we're seeing overseas with ISIS and all that. If God's on your side, you can justify a lot.
Yeah.
And so for me, that's why the Christian gospel is so very important, because Jesus says, love your neighbour as you love yourself, and love your enemy. And if you can't do that, you're not actually religious. And so for me, that's the safety check on Christianity. If I'm going to think I'm going to go out and get a gun, or I'm going to go and get a truck and take it somewhere, then Jesus says, if you don't love your enemy, you're not on my side. And so suddenly that's the check. And that's why I suppose I'm not of other faiths, because they don't all have that safety valve. Many atheists, I think the vast majority of our population have morals. And like I said before, what I've seen is doing funerals for the great-grandparents and then the parents and then sort of my generation, is that those morals last for a while, but they're dissipated, because you've got to have a grounding. The next generation, they're taught to question, why would I do that? Why? Who cares? And so you see that it lasts for a generation or two, and then all of a sudden those morals are gone.
It's like family business principles. That third generation lose the wealth. They lose the whole business.
Yep.
Because they don't forget the principles that it was founded on and why.
I'll go back to another music story. I think that there are some people out there who play awful classical music, especially 5-year-olds. and I think there are some Christians out there who are still practicing at the low level. Have a look at the composer. And the composer is Jesus, and he knows how to play it. And there are some Christians out there who've practiced a lot, and maybe they're one of the best performers out there, but they're still not perfect. The only one who is perfect is Jesus. So judge Christianity by Jesus, and reject Christianity not by Christians, but reject Christianity or believe in it based on who Jesus is. And have a look for yourself. Don't just believe what other people tell you. Examine the documents. Read the books of Matthew, Mark, Luke and John. Listen to the eyewitness account. Read those eyewitness accounts. Talk to people, and reject Christianity or believe in it based on truth, not on hearsay.
Paul, you mentioned that one of the things listeners could do is send an email to Minister Kate Jones, but they could also send an email to their local member and CC it to Kate Jones and say, hey, I value RI. I just want you to know that. And that's one of the things you can do. Let's talk about RI at local school level. If people are listening going, actually, maybe I need to support or be behind RI in my local community, what are things they can do, and how do they go about doing it?
They can go along to to be able to be teach in a local school, you need to be part of a church. And so you ask your pastor or your minister if they know of anyone involved in either schools. Or you can just go up to a school and ask who the coordinator is and connect that way. But just because you want to teach, though, doesn't mean you're going to be able to teach. There's a lot of hoops that you have to pass through to be able to do that. But that's one way. Praying is another way, because we believe that's really important. We believe God answers prayer, and that's another thing. And as Paul said before, get involved, write and encourage. That's really important. You may not be able to teach, but you can write a letter to Kate Jones.
And sometimes it is, if there are media comments and all that, and you get people making comments. I'm probably not big on the comments, because I think that just shows ignorance, and you suddenly find, there's all the misinformation and the ignorance that we're trying to correct. But sometimes it is. I know governments, they do take notice of how many people comment and how many people do this. So sometimes it is worth saying, do not get into arguments. That's not the Christian way. No. It's more about just saying, I really value this. And, like you said before, telling stories about this made a difference in my life. This was something positive, because you can't dispute people's stories, So I really like the idea as well of if you're in a school and you're not in a church, talk to your RI teacher and encourage them, because it is a very lonely, unrewarding job. The people who go into RI are just not driven by ego. It is amazing. Why would you go to a school for 10 years where a lot of the time you don't see much
volunteering your time?
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
important.
And we know that people who volunteer to do something as opposed to being forced to do it, they bring so much more to that task. And I know schools would definitely not want to lose volunteers. Schools run on volunteers. We've got wonderful teachers, absolutely, we need them. But I don't know, the volunteers are is that the mortar in the bricks that gives it something. So, if you support an RI teacher, I know many RI religious instructors, they pay out of their own wallet for their material. And if you're a pastor out there, change that. Your church should be paying for their material, etc., etc. And as we don't think this is a battle with people. We actually think this is a philosophical, a spiritual battle. It's a battle of ideas, and so we don't have any animosity towards people. It's about saying, how do we make sure we think right so that we're not going, well, I want my opinion to be the only opinion.
It's about tolerance and just living together in a country where we're free to believe different things, but we still get on together and we respect one another. And I think that's really important, that we do respect one another.
And Karen, that's one of the things I've talked about, the decline of civility. Lose civility, you lose democracy, and it's such an important thing. But I also want to challenge, for my closing comment to listeners tonight, I started about the hypocrisy, and I want to finish with a mate of mine who I spoke today. He reminded me of when Ron Williams challenged the federal government and Scripture Union Queensland on funding for chaplaincy, and then at the time was Tim Mander, who's now a Member of Parliament, and they were on Talkback Radio, and he was listening to the arguments between them, and Barnaby Joyce rang in as a caller, which is quite unusual, and he said to Tim Mander, he said, of course you want to share your faith. All us Christians want to share our faith. Right? That's different to coercing.
Yep.
But then he turned to Ron Williams and he said, Ron, you're doing exactly the same. You're criticising him for the exact same thing you want to do. You want to share your beliefs and you want people to accept your beliefs. And you're just, this is the irony, is that if we actually take a broader view of religion that's about worldview, I can hear what you believe, I don't have to agree with it, and that doesn't mean you're coercing me, and vice versa. And so we need to actually cut out some of the nonsense that's going around. And so that phrase of RI scare campaign is about some of that sort of stuff, which is let's level the playing field here and have an intelligent, informed, civil discussion.
Yep.
Thank you for giving up your Sunday night to chat with me on such an important topic.
Well, thank you for inviting us in, because it is really important.
And it's been great being here and getting some great questions from callers and hearing some great stories.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thanks for joining me tonight. You've been listening to Talking Life on Families, number 196.5 in Brisbane and around the world via the web at 96five.com. And my conversation tonight has been about the importance of religious instruction in our state schools. My guests have been Paul Clark, who is the acting chair for the Queensland Christian Religious Instruction Network, and Karen Grenning, who is a spokesperson also for the Queensland Christian Religious Instruction Network. Now, if you want to get follow-up information, a podcast will be available in the next day or two from the webpage. And so if you go to 96five.com, you'll find it there. If you've got suggestion for a show or you want to give feedback, send an email, admin at peterj.com.au. Answering the telephone tonight's been my lovely wife, Narrowly. I'm Peter Janetzki. I'm a counsellor and educator. Look forward to talking with you next week on Talking Life.
When your fears are all consuming,